Haunted doll in the container. Jack Reynolds was a petty thief in suburban Los Angeles. He chose Halloween as his night of operation because people were less vigilant. The boxes left on porches after a busy day of parties, decorations, and games were easy pickings for him. As he drove through a quiet residential area, Jack noticed a large shipping container sitting in the backyard of a house where a pumpkin lantern flickered on the front porch. Tagged on the outside of the box was a simple message, "To David." Although he had no idea what it was, Jack felt certain that there was something valuable inside. Looking around and seeing everything quiet, he quickly grabbed the box, threw it into the back seat of the car, and disappeared into the night, leaving behind the rustling sound of dry leaves and the flickering light from Halloween decorations. Back in his small apartment, Jack hurriedly opened the box, hoping to find something expensive. But there was nothing inside but an old doll. It wore a white lace dress stained by time, and its curly hair fell loosely over its pale face. Its large black glass eyes stared straight at Jack as if they were watching his every move. A joke? Jack muttered in disappointment. He picked up the doll, feeling the coldness of the old cloth and plastic as if it hadn't been touched in ages. Annoyed by the trick, he threw the doll onto the shelf, grabbed a beer, and sat down on the worn chair in front of the TV. But even as he watched the TV show, Jack had a strange feeling. There seemed to be something in the room with him, a cold gaze that made him uncomfortable. He glanced at the shelf where the doll sat. Though it didn't move, its glass eyes seemed to be looking straight at him. That night, Jack went to bed early to prepare for another night of action. But as soon as he closed his eyes, he fell into a nightmare. In his dream, he found himself standing in a cold, dark room. In the middle of the room, the doll sat on a wooden chair, its mouth moving slightly as if whispering unclear words. It felt like something invisible was binding his limbs. No matter how hard he tried to run, he couldn't escape the doll's black gaze. He woke up, sweating and his heart pounding. The room was still dark, but in that quiet space, Jack felt like there were eyes watching him from the darkness. Over the next few days, Jack noticed strange things starting to happen. Every time he left the room, the doll would appear in different locations. He remembered clearly putting it on the shelf, but when he came back, it was sitting right in the middle of the kitchen table. Another time, he found it in the closet, a place he never put his hands in. Jack was starting to lose his patience. "I'm just imagining things," he muttered, trying to reassure himself. But the nightmares grew worse. Every night he saw the doll in his dreams, sometimes standing at the head of his bed, sometimes crawling up to his chest, whispering cold sounds in his ear. Even when he was awake, Jack could still hear a soft chuckle echoing in his head, as if something was playing tricks on his mind. After a week of poor sleep, Jack began to have paranoia. He could feel the doll's presence even when he couldn't see it. The darkness in the apartment became heavy, and strange sounds echoed in the night. Soft footsteps on the wooden floor, distant giggles. One night, Jack tried to stuff the doll in a trash bag and take it out to the bin in the backyard. But the next morning, when he opened his bedroom door, he paled when he saw the doll sitting right on the bed, its head tilted slightly as if mocking. The jet-black glass eyes reflected his helplessness. Jack felt like he was stuck in a vicious cycle. He couldn't let it go, couldn't face it. That soulless gaze was always there in his mind, draining him day by day. Jack knew he had to do something before he went crazy. That Halloween night, when everyone was busy with games and costumes, he loaded the doll into his car and drove out of town. He found a deserted junkyard on the outskirts of town, where no one would be around at that hour. In the darkness, Jack threw the doll into a large pile of trash. He stood there for a few seconds, watching it sink into the pile of junk. Before turning and running back to his car. This time, he told himself he was free from that obsession forever. But when he got home, a cold feeling came over him. The bedroom door was slightly open, and in the dim light, Jack saw familiar dark eyes staring straight at him from the corner of the room. The doll sat on the bed, its head slightly tilted, as if it knew full well that he could never escape. Jack locked himself in his apartment for days after that. He didn't go out, didn't dare sleep, because every time he closed his eyes, the nightmares came back. The images of the doll, the whispers, and the creepy laughter kept haunting him. Even though it was morning, he could still feel those glass eyes watching him from every corner. Another time, he tried burning it in the fireplace, but when the fire died out, the doll remained intact, lying motionless in the ashes. Other attempts were also futile. Jack could not escape it, and the feeling of being trapped by fear became more and more obvious. On a rainy night, Jack decided to run away from the apartment. He rented a room in a strange town, hoping that this time he would be left alone. But as soon as he lay down on the bed, he heard a familiar whisper, "You think you can run?" He opened his eyes, and the doll was sitting at the head of the bed. Its black eyes glowed in the darkness, as if waiting for the moment Jack would let go. He sensed clearly that there was nowhere far enough, no way to escape. Jack just lay there, helplessly staring into those lifeless eyes, knowing that this chase would never end. And the doll still sat there, silently watching, as if time had no meaning to it. Who knew how long it would wait to find its next victim? The Thief and the Cursed Mirror. Victor Reynolds, a notorious thief, always chooses items that are valuable and easy to sell. This time, he received information about a special item, a 19th century antique mirror that is considered very rare, currently located in a secluded old house in the suburbs. The buyer offered a high price if Victor would remove it from the house. Despite the rumors about the cursed mirror, Victor did not care. To him, it was just baseless superstition. That night, he broke into the old house. The wind whistled through the rotten windows, and in the quiet house, Victor immediately saw his target, a large mirror placed prominently in the living room. The mirror was framed in ebony, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to twist into twisted faces. The polished surface reflected Victor's image with suspicious detail, as if the mirror were observing him, rather than the other way around. Victor took down the mirror, but as soon as his hand touched the wooden frame, a cold air pierced his skin. For a moment, his reflection in the mirror curled its lips, smiling wickedly. But Victor didn't notice. He quickly took the mirror out of the house and brought it back to his apartment. Little did he know that from that moment on, the door between the two worlds had been opened. Victor set up the mirror in the living room and prepared to go to bed. But on the very first night, strange phenomena began to occur. As he walked across the living room to get some water, he happened to look into the mirror. For a moment, he saw a figure standing right behind him. A woman in a white dress, her long hair falling over half her face. Victor's heart stopped. He turned around, but the living room was empty. The room was dark, and the mirror reflected something that the real world did not. Victor tried to convince himself that he was tired. But every time he looked into the mirror, the woman's figure appeared more clearly. She stood closer to him every day, and sometimes he could hear a whisper from behind. "You shouldn't have taken it." That night, Victor woke up in the middle of the night, cold sweat all over his body. Whispers echoed throughout the apartment, as if someone was standing right next to his bed, whispering in his ear. He jumped up, shining a flashlight around the room, but found nothing. The strange phenomena did not stop. The ghost in the mirror began to move. One night, Victor saw the woman's thin hand slowly reach out in the mirror, touching his shoulder. He froze, unable to move. Cold breath fanned the back of his neck, and in the mirror, the woman smiled, a twisted, evil smile. Victor tried to run, but every time he turned around, the image in the mirror became clearer. The ghost was standing right next to him, just a few feet away. He decided to investigate the mirror and discovered a terrible story. The woman in the mirror was named Margaret, who used to live in that old house. After being betrayed by her husband, she ended everything in front of the mirror, and her soul was trapped inside forever. All those who have taken the mirror from the house have experienced terrifying phenomena and eventually gone mad or disappeared without a trace. Victor decided to throw the mirror away, but all attempts failed. Every time he took it out of the house, it reappeared in the living room, as if it had never intended to leave. The ghost in the mirror grew stronger. She appeared not only in the mirror, but also in his dreams. Victor dreamed that he was being pulled into the mirror, trapped in endless darkness with Margaret's eyes following his every move. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Victor fled town that night. He drove relentlessly, trying to get as far away from the mirror as possible. But on the road, when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw Margaret sitting in the back seat, her face pale and smiling hauntedly. Victor screamed, lost control, and crashed into the roadside. When he turned to look at the back seat, no one was there. But he knew he would never be free of the curse. Margaret was still there, watching him from every mirror. Victor disappeared without a trace. His apartment was abandoned, and the mirror remained there, waiting for the next victim. Curious people who entered the apartment said they saw the shadow of a woman lurking in the mirror, with dark eyes and an eerie smile. If you see an old mirror for sale at a bargain price, remember, some things are more than just reflections. They are doors to a world that should not be opened. Red Scarecrow Festival. In suburban Pennsylvania, the Thompson family holds an annual Halloween festival, famous for its scarecrow making contest on their sprawling farm. This year, they wanted to bring a new and more terrifying experience. After much discussion, the family decided to use a nearby abandoned field as the new venue for the festival. However, the people in the area were not enthusiastic about the idea. That field, no one has been there for decades, warned a neighbor. The farmers who used to live there have disappeared without anyone knowing why. The Thompson family ignored the rumors. They believed that a little mystery would only add to the fun of the festival. The town couldn't resist the lure of the contest with its big prizes, and on Halloween night, dozens of people flocked to the moor. As the sun sets, the fields are slowly enveloped in darkness and mist. The festival goers eagerly erect scarecrows, each one bizarre and unique. Some wear pointed hats, others wear misshapen clown masks. Straw, rope, and rags are used to their full advantage. Helen, the Thompsons' youngest daughter, felt something was wrong with the field. The air felt heavy and damp, as if something invisible was pressing down on the air. She looked around at the scarecrows that had been erected everywhere and felt uneasy. They did not seem inanimate, but rather waiting for something. Helen tugged on her brother Tommy's arm. "This place is weird." "I don't feel right," Tommy laughed. "You're too scared." "It's Halloween. It's fun to be a little scary." Laughter and music filled the air, drowning out the uneasy feeling in the air. Attendees enjoyed the food, played games, and took pictures with the scarecrows they had created. The atmosphere gradually became lively, and even Helen began to relax a little. As darkness falls, strange things begin to happen. At first, it was only very small movements. A scarecrow arm moving slightly in the darkness. A straw head tilting slightly toward passers-by. Did anyone see that? Helen asked in panic as she saw a scarecrow spinning its head. Everyone laughed, thinking it was just a prank. One of the group even joked, maybe the kids hid the controller inside. But the small movements did not stop. Each scarecrow gradually stood up, abandoning the wooden sticks that supported them, as if they had regained their freedom. Helen looked around, horrified to see that the scarecrows were not only standing still, but were moving towards the crowd. A chill ran down her spine. "Tommy, look." Her brother turned back, also beginning to feel uneasy. The scarecrows moved with an initially unsteady gait, but their steps gradually became more agile and purposeful. The music suddenly stopped. People around began to realize that this was no joke. A man tried to get close to one of the scarecrows to pull it down, but as soon as he touched it, the scarecrow tightened its grip on his arm. He tried to pull away, but it wouldn't let go. Screams rang out from all around as the crowd realized they could not escape the scarecrows that surrounded them. The creatures made of straw and rags seemed to be controlled by some dark force. They were no longer harmless as they had been at first, but became violent, grabbing people one by one and dragging them to the ground. Helen was jostled by the crowd and fell into a pile of hay. She looked around, trying to find Tommy, but saw only shadows running in the darkness. She got up and ran toward the edge of the field, but scarecrows appeared from every direction, blocking her way. She hid behind a mound of earth, her heart pounding in her chest. Footsteps echoed everywhere. Helen gasped, trying to keep quiet, but a scarecrow spotted her. It approached slowly, its hollow eyes staring at her. Helen stepped back, but it quickly grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward it with terrible force. She struggled, kicking at it with all her might, but the scarecrow did not falter. Across the field, one by one, people were dragged down and disappeared into the darkness. Screams rang out and then died away. Leaving an eerie and eerie silence. Helen watched in horror, realizing that there was no escape for her. She tried to run to Tommy, but her brother was also struggling between the scarecrow's arms. "Helen, run!" he shouted, the four being pulled down. Helen ran towards the edge of the field, hoping for a way out. But every time she thought she had made it, the scarecrows would appear from the darkness, surrounding her like demons. When dawn came, the fields were silent again, as if nothing had happened. The people were gone, and only new scarecrows stood here and there. But there was one difference. Their faces had changed. Each scarecrow bears the face of someone who was present at the festival contorted, desperate, as if trying to escape its imprisonment. The straw eyes are empty, but anyone who looks into them can feel the horror etched within them. Since that night, no one has dared to set foot in that abandoned field. People tell stories about the fateful Halloween festival, about scarecrows that awakened and transformed the participants into part of themselves. It is believed that every Halloween night, if you pass by that field, you can see the scarecrows moving slightly, as if they are waiting for the next person to walk in. And if you are not careful, you could become the new face in the field, forever trapped among the straw and hay, never to find your way back. The Abandoned House with Whispers. Charlie Hayes is no ordinary thief. Not only does he seek out valuables, he also enjoys the thrill of breaking into places others fear to set foot. Rumor has it that there is an abandoned house on the corner of Old San Antonio, a place no one dares to go because of the strange things that happen there. Charlie didn't hesitate. For him, it was just a new challenge and also a great opportunity to make money. On Halloween night, in the thick fog, he drove his old car to the house. The atmosphere was strangely quiet, as if the whole neighborhood had forgotten its existence. Charlie pushed open the rusted iron gate and stepped over the old porch. The house before him looked like it was rotting from the inside out. But to him, it was just a perfect shell for something still valuable. The wooden door creaked open as he used the crowbar to gently pry it open. There was no resistance, as if it were waiting for someone to enter. A musty, putrid smell filled his nostrils. The flashlight beam illuminated the faded walls, the warped picture frames hanging crookedly on the walls. There was no sign of life, but the house felt as if it were still breathing. As soon as he entered, the door behind him slammed shut. He spun around, grabbed the handle and twisted, but the door wouldn't budge. He cursed under his breath, but pushed his worries aside. This was just an abandoned house. He walked deeper inside, his shoes sinking lightly on the rotten floor. The flashlight shone on the mold-stained walls. The old grandfather clock was still there, but had long since stopped. He began to rummage through it, looking for anything he could take, but all he could find were broken or old things that were worthless. Then he heard something. At first, it was just a faint sound, like the wind filtering through cracks. But when he stopped to listen, the sounds turned into whispers, soft, incoherent, as if someone were talking right next to his ear. Charlie swung his flashlight around, but saw no one. The whispering continued, now near, now far, as if coming from all directions. He could hear men's voices, women's voices, even children's voices. The voices were indistinct, spliced together into fragments of conversation. He's here. Don't let him get away. He shouldn't be here. Charlie felt his heart stop for a moment. He shouted, "Who is it? Come out here." No one answered. Only the whispering, growing louder, echoed through the dark space. Charlie started walking faster, but the whispering continued, his every step accompanied by distant sounds. The light bulb on the ceiling, which should not have been working, suddenly flickered, emitting a pale yellow light as if the place was being manipulated by some force. In the flickering light, Charlie saw silhouettes lurking in the dark corners, figures standing still, but every time he turned to look, they disappeared as if they had never existed. He began to feel a cold breath on the back of his neck. Something or someone was following him. Every time he turned, all he saw was pitch blackness and faded walls. But the whispering never stopped. Don't let him escape. He belongs here. Charlie rushed to the front door, pounding on the doorknob with the crowbar, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to rise in him. Cold sweat ran down his forehead. He turned to look for another way out, but every door and window he approached was locked. The flickering lights grew fainter, and the whispers were no longer distant whispers. They were whispers right in his ear, each word clear and malicious. He will never leave. The darkness thickened, like an invisible curtain covering the house, choking his every breath. His footsteps faltered down the endless hallway. Every time he passed a room, the lights would go out, leaving absolute darkness behind him. Something was following him, each step growing heavier, as if the house was swallowing him from within. Charlie collapsed against a small window. As he tried to open it to escape, an invisible hand clamped down on his shoulder, cold and heavy as chains. Giggles rang out around him, a distorted, creepy sound, as if the house were rejoicing that its prey had been trapped. Charlie didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe it had been hours, maybe all night. He could no longer tell reality from fantasy. The whispers continued to ring in his ears, unceasing. As the first light of dawn crept in through the cracks in the window, the whispers suddenly stopped. There was no sound but the gentle wind blowing through the branches outside. The front door swung open abruptly, as if it had never been locked. Charlie rushed outside, breathing in the fresh morning air like someone who had just escaped from a long nightmare. The house stood silently behind him, eerily silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But Charlie knew he hadn't really escaped. Even though he'd left the house, the whispers were still there, echoing in his mind every time he closed his eyes. And every night, as darkness fell, Charlie could feel the chill creeping into his room, and the whispering would return, whispering from afar, a reminder that he could never escape whatever had followed him. He knew that no matter how far he ran, whatever had awakened in that house would always find its way back. And the scariest thing? Next time, it wouldn't just whisper. Lisa has just moved into an old house in suburban Pennsylvania, isolated in a wooded area. The house was built in the 1920s and had been owned by several owners, all of whom moved out after a short time. When signing the lease, the landlord reminded her of something strange.
Do not open the basement door, no matter what happens.
He did not explain further, only saying that the plumbing system below had been broken for a long time. Lisa didn't care. She liked the idea of having a quiet place to live and enjoy her freedom after breaking up with her abusive boyfriend. However, she quickly realized that this house was not as peaceful as she thought. The first night, everything seemed normal. Lisa packed her things, cooked dinner, and enjoyed her privacy. However, around 2 a.m, she woke up to a strange noise. It was a rattling sound coming from the floor. It sounded like someone was dragging metal underneath. She listened for a moment, but the sound disappeared. Thinking it was just the sound of the old house, she tried to go back to sleep. However, the next morning, when she went down to the kitchen, she noticed that several items in the kitchen had been disturbed. The knife block on the counter had been moved, and a small knife was missing. A few days later, Lisa began to hear faint whispers coming from the basement. They weren't constant, but every night, as she was getting ready for bed, the sound would come back. "Lisa, come down here." The voice was weak and lingering, as if coming from a very far place. Lisa felt a chill down her spine, but tried to convince herself that it was just an illusion or the wind coming through the cracks in the door. However, the next night, the voice rang out again, this time clearer and almost pleading. "Lisa, open the door." She turned on the lights in the entire house, stood in front of the basement door, and stared at it. Her hand shook as she touched the doorknob. Suddenly, there was a click. Came from behind the door, as if someone was gently trying to turn the handle from the inside. Lisa ran into her bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. When the operator asked her what was going on, all she could say was, "There's someone in my basement. He knows my name." She heard a slow knocking sound from outside her bedroom, one beat at a time, cold and deliberate. The knocking seemed to signal that someone knew she was scared, desperate. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They searched the entire house but found no one. The basement door was locked from the outside, and there was no sign of forced entry. They reassured Lisa that she was probably just stressed and to call back if she heard anything else unusual. After the police left, Lisa decided to put a heavy chair against the basement door and tried to go back to sleep. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she heard a light tapping sound on the floor right under her bed. The next night, Lisa decided to place a chair right next to the basement door to listen better. Around midnight, the voice rang out again. "Lisa, come down here. Open the door." This time, It was no longer gentle, but urgent and angry, as if impatient. She gathered her courage, unlocked the basement door, and gingerly pushed it open. The dark staircase revealed itself before her. The smell of mold and rust hit her in the face, making her step back. Suddenly, from the darkness, a gray hand reached out and grabbed her leg. Lisa screamed, jerked her leg, and fell to the floor. She looked down and saw clearly a pale face and sunken eyes staring from the darkness below the stairs. "You opened the door," a hoarse voice said.
"I'll never let you go."
Lisa scrambled back and kicked the door, slamming it shut before anything could emerge. But before she could lock it, the door swung open again, a terrible force from inside shoving it open. She ran up to her bedroom, locked the door, and searched for her phone to call the police. But when she returned, she found the phone was gone, as if someone had taken it during her panic.
Oh, God!
Heavy footsteps began to echo from the stairs, each step making Lisa feel like she was about to stop breathing. She found a knife in the drawer, holding it to her chest with trembling hands. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and a tall figure with a blurry face stood in the doorway. "Time to come with us," it said, its voice trailing like its last breath. The police were called a second time by a neighbor who heard Lisa screaming. When they broke down the door, the house was empty. There was no sign of Lisa, no sign of forced entry, but the basement door was wide open. In the basement, they found a small tunnel leading all the way to the woods behind. Strangely, they discovered handprints on the wall, handprints that were not human, too long and with nails too sharp. Lisa was never found. Later, new tenants also reported hearing the whispering voice at night, but the voice no longer called Lisa's name. Now it called new names, the names of the new residents. The story of this house has become a local legend. Those who hear it shudder to know that whatever is in the basement never goes away. It just waits, calling out to the next person who dares to open the door. And if you hear a knock in the middle of the night, remember never to open the door, because once you do, you will never be able to escape. Jessica stood in front of the old wooden gate of her new house. The lush vines wrapped around the fence like a green curtain, creating a feeling of both mystery and peace. She looked up at the two-story house with discolored red bricks, the slanted porch as if it were bending down to welcome the new guest. The house is located at the end of a quiet street, far away from the noisy city, just as Jessica wanted, a place to start life over after unhappy events. From the very first night, Jessica realized something was wrong. As she lay in bed, just drifting off to sleep, she heard soft footsteps on the wooden floor. At first, she thought it might be the creaking of the old floor, but this sound was clearer than that. Slow footsteps, as if someone was walking down the hallway right in front of her door. Jessica held her breath, trying to listen. But when she opened the door and looked, the hallway was empty, only darkness covered. Jessica convinced herself that it was just an illusion because she was not used to her new house. But the strange events did not stop there. The lights in the house began to flicker every time she walked past. Sometimes she felt invisible eyes following her, sending a chill down her spine. Whenever she turned around, there was nothing but an empty room. As time went on, Jessica's unease grew. After a few days, she decided to explore the house more closely to find out if there was anything unusual. One afternoon, she accidentally discovered the door to the basement hidden behind the living room closet. The heavy wooden door squeaked as it opened. Revealing a staircase leading down. The dark space below emitted a chill that made Jessica shiver. But curiosity overcame her fear, and she slowly walked down. The weak flashlight illuminated every dark corner of the basement. The musty smell filled his nose, and the wind whistling through the broken glass made an eerie sound. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, Jessica discovered a small room tucked away in the darkest corner of the basement. The door to this room was locked, but the rusted lock was no longer strong enough to keep her out. After a few tries, the door opened with an eerie creak. Inside the room was a strange sight. Deep scratches were left on the wooden floor, as if something had tried to get out. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine as she saw the traces. There were several faded black and white photographs on the wall, taken years ago of the house. In the flickering light of the flashlight, Jessica could see the outlines of faces in the photos, faces that she knew, as if she had seen them somewhere before. That night, Jessica's sleep was disturbed by a nightmare. She dreamed that she was standing in the middle of a basement, surrounded by thick darkness. From within the darkness, a shadowy figure appeared. A tall black shadow with glowing eyes. It approached Jessica step by step, breathing heavily and smelling like a corpse. Jessica tried to run away, but her feet were frozen in place. Jessica woke up with a start, gasping for breath. The room was pitch black, and it was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. Suddenly, a sound came from the basement. Slow, steady footsteps, as if someone was climbing the stairs. Jessica turned on the nightlight, but it didn't work. She shakily searched for the flashlight on the table, but as soon as she turned it on, she was startled to see a dark figure standing at the end of her bed. It had no face, just a dark shape with glowing red eyes staring at her. Jessica screamed and ran out of the room, but the shadow followed closely behind. She ran downstairs, hoping to escape the house. But when she got to the front door, she found it locked from the inside, and there was no way to open it. She panicked and ran to the window, but as soon as she touched it, a cold hand grabbed her shoulder from behind. Jessica's scream echoed in the dark night, then died away. The darkness swallowed her up, leaving the house in an eerie silence. The next morning, the house was as quiet as ever. The lights were on, the front door was unlocked, and everything was in order, as if no one had ever lived there. No one knew where Jessica had gone. Neighbors only discovered her absence when they found mail piled up outside their door, unclaimed. The police were called, but the investigation turned up no clues. Jessica had disappeared without a trace, just like the previous owners of the house. The rumors about the house down the street grew even more creepy, but no one knew for sure what had happened. The house still stands there, silent and dark, like a trap waiting for a new victim. The old curtains fluttered in the wind, and in the darkness of the basement, soft footsteps still echoed every night, the footsteps of trapped souls, never to escape. And then one day, the house was put up for sale again. A new buyer appeared, completely unaware of the horrors that had come before. The house continued its endless cycle, like a never-ending nightmare. The house at the end of the street waited, patient and silent, preparing to welcome its new owner. Amanda, a 27-year-old young woman, has just moved into a small ground-floor apartment in suburban Florida. After years of living in toxic and stressful relationships, she decided to start her life over in hopes of finding peace. It all started with something small. Amanda noticed some things in the house had been moved that she didn't remember touching. The TV remote she usually left on the table was on the sofa. The kitchen window was left ajar several times, though she was sure she closed it every night before going to bed. She convinced herself that it was just a bad memory or the new routine of being in a strange house that made her feel uneasy. But then the uncomfortable feelings began to become more and more evident. Every time Amanda came home from work, she felt as if someone had been in the apartment, as if the air around her still held the scent of a stranger. One night, while she was sleeping, she suddenly felt something strange. In the darkness, she had a clear feeling that someone was standing at the end of her bed, even though her eyes could not see anything. Amanda turned on the bedside lamp, but there was no one there. She told herself it was just a stress-induced hallucination and closed her eyes, forcing herself to sleep. But the feeling of being watched still haunted her, like an invisible shadow she couldn't escape. That night, after work, Amanda lay in bed reading as usual. The clock had already pointed to 1 a.m. and she was starting to feel tired. Just as she was closing the book, a cold feeling ran down her spine. She suddenly had a very clear feeling that someone was watching her, watching from a very close distance. She looked up and saw her bedroom door slowly opening, making a slight creaking sound. Though she clearly remembered closing it before, a sudden feeling of dread welled up inside her. The air in the room became heavy, and her breathing became more rapid. She lay still for a few seconds, listening to every little sound in the apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. After a few minutes of gathering her wits, Amanda tiptoed out of bed, her bare feet lightly touching the cold wooden floor. She slowly walked towards the slightly ajar door, trying to convince herself that it was either the wind or the door had just slid open on its old hinges. As she reached for the door, she was about to open it wider. A tall, dark figure suddenly appeared from behind the door, standing there silently as if it had been waiting for her for a long time. Its face was dark, empty, like an endless void. Amanda stared into those empty eyes, feeling like her soul was being sucked into an endless abyss. In panic, Amanda screamed and quickly slammed the door shut. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Her hands shaking, she quickly pulled a chair under the doorknob, jamming it in as if it were the only wall between her and the mysterious entity. Amanda gasped, her back against the door. She tried to control her panic. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears as if it were trying to break out of her chest. She quickly reached for the phone on the bed and shakily dialed 911. "Hello, there's someone in my house," she whispered into the phone, her voice choked with fear. "He's right outside my bedroom door. I don't know how he got in." The operator calmly instructed Amanda to stay safe and said the police were on their way. As she waited, Amanda pressed her ear to the door, trying to hear any movement outside. But there was an eerie silence. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. It was like something was waiting for her to make a mistake. "15 minutes later, the police arrived and knocked on Amanda's apartment door. She opened her bedroom door and ran out to meet them, pale and dazed. The two officers searched every corner of the apartment but found no signs of forced entry. The windows were locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. Everything looked normal except for one strange detail. On the carpet in front of Amanda's bedroom door, there were clearly printed wet footprints of an adult. The trail led from the living room to the bedroom door, but then disappeared completely. The police tried to reassure Amanda, saying it was probably a mistake or a nightmare. But Amanda knew exactly what she had seen. The shadow was no hallucination. It was there, right behind her door. After that night, Amanda didn't dare stay in the apartment another day. She packed her things and moved to a friend's house. For a week after the horrific event, she could still feel invisible eyes watching her, even when she was no longer in the apartment. Every night, when she closed her eyes, she still saw the image of that shadow's dark, empty face appear in her mind, as if it was reminding her that it had not left yet and was still waiting. Amanda never returned to the apartment. The landlord said that shortly after she moved out, other tenants reported bedroom doors opening in the middle of the night and a feeling of someone watching them from the shadows. The apartment eventually became vacant, abandoned, and rumors of a shadowy presence spread throughout the area. There was one thing Amanda always wondered. What was that shadow? And how did it get into her house? The answer would probably remain a mystery, just like the way that shadow still waits at night, behind the bedroom doors of those unlucky enough to enter that apartment. Jessica is an ambitious young woman who has just purchased an old house in the suburbs after getting a new job in a nearby city. She has always dreamed of having her own private place to escape the hustle and bustle of life, and this house at the end of a quiet suburban street seems to be the perfect choice. With a large yard and old trees surrounding it, the house offers a sense of peace and seclusion that is ideal for her. When Jessica moved in, neighbors warned her about the strange stories surrounding the house. They said that the previous owners, an elderly couple, had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Everyone assumed that they had left the house abruptly, but stories of strange noises at night and shadowy figures in the house continued to circulate through the grapevine. Jessica, being the practical and skeptical person she is, paid little attention to these rumors. She believed them to be nothing more than the product of imagination and urban legends. The first day passed normally. Jessica quickly rearranged her belongings and felt satisfied with her new home. But the first night was completely different. That night, Jessica woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange noise. At first, she thought it was just the creaking of the old house, but this sound was different from the usual noise. It was the sound of light footsteps on the wooden floor, coming from the hallway right outside her bedroom. Jessica sat up, feeling a chill down her spine. She listened, but the footsteps stopped, leaving absolute silence. She convinced herself that she was probably imagining things, the stress of moving. But as she lay back down, the footsteps came again, clearer this time, as if someone was moving very slowly right outside her bedroom door. Panic rose, but Jessica decided to face her fear. She got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat she kept near the door, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. No one was there. But the feeling of unease was still there, the air cold as if someone had just walked through. Jessica is an ambitious young woman who has just purchased an old house in the suburbs after getting a new job in a nearby city. She has always dreamed of having her own private place to escape the hustle and bustle of life, and this house at the end of a quiet suburban street seems to be the perfect choice. With a large yard and old trees surrounding it, the house offers a sense of peace and seclusion that is ideal for her. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt like someone was staring at her from the darkness. The next day, Jessica tried to forget the strange events and continued with her work, but the strange events did not stop. In the evening, while she was cleaning the house, suddenly the light in the living room flickered, then went out. In the darkness, she heard a faint whisper from behind, as if someone was standing very close and whispering in her ear. Jessica turned around, but the living room was completely empty. She quickly turned the lights back on, but the cold and tense feeling did not go away. The second night, the footsteps returned, this time more frequent. Jessica woke up in the middle of the night again, but this time, the noise wasn't limited to the hallway. She heard creaking coming from under the floorboards, as if someone was moving around in the basement. She couldn't remember ever going down to the basement since she moved in, and now the thought of it made her shiver. The unsettling feeling couldn't be ignored any longer. So Jessica decided to check the basement the next day, no matter how scared she was. The next morning, after mustering up her courage, Jessica went down to the basement. The basement lights were dim, flickering as she walked. The air was thick, damp, and stuffy, as if the place had been long forgotten. As the dim light shone into a hidden corner, Jessica noticed a small wooden door she had never seen before, hidden behind an old bookshelf. Her heart pounded as she approached. Her hand shook as she touched the doorknob. The heavy wooden door creaked as she opened it. Inside was a small room, empty except for a single wooden chair in the middle of the room. What was even stranger were the long, deep scratches on the floor, as if someone or something had tried to get out of this room. Jessica couldn't help but feel the dreaded startup. She slammed the door shut and ran upstairs. In her mind, she decided to sell this house as soon as possible. But before she could call the real estate agent, terrible events happened that night. As night fell, Jessica sat in the living room, trying to calm herself down. Suddenly, the front door of the house opened by itself with a slow creak. No one was there. She stood up, slowly approaching to close the door, but as she touched the doorknob, a cold wind blew past. carrying with it the feeling of an invisible entity passing through her. She turned and saw the light in the living room flicker, just like the night before. Then it went out, leaving her in complete darkness. But this time, it wasn't just darkness and silence. She heard footsteps approaching her, clear and creepy. They weren't coming from the basement anymore. They were right in the living room, just a few feet away. She turned and saw the light in the living room flicker, just like the night before. Then it went out, leaving her in complete darkness. But this time, it wasn't just darkness and silence. She heard approaching her, clear and creepy. They weren't coming from the basement anymore. They were right in the living room, just a few feet away. The shadow was not human, but an entity from the house's past. She realized that this was the reason the previous couple had disappeared. She could not escape. Jessica tried to scream one last time, but the sound was stuck in her throat. The next morning, the neighbor found the front door of the house wide open, but Jessica was nowhere to be seen. The house was empty, with only a cold feeling and a baseball bat lying on the floor as the only sign of a desperate struggle. Jessica is gone, like her previous owners. The house at the end of the street is once again deserted, waiting for the next victim to cross the threshold and fall into the vortex of unexplained mysteries. Emily moved into her small apartment just a few weeks ago. It's the perfect space for someone living alone, quiet, cozy, and well-equipped. She felt proud that she had finally escaped from living with her friends, and now she could enjoy her privacy. Every day after work, she enjoyed spending time cleaning and rearranging her room to her liking, decorating it with small potted plants on the windowsill and her favorite paintings hanging on the walls. However, every night since moving in, Emily has had an uneasy feeling that she can't explain. Although the apartment is always clean, airy, and filled with natural light during the day, when night falls, the space seems to transform into another entity. Sometimes she felt like there were eyes watching her from somewhere. Even though she told herself it was just a natural feeling of anxiety when living alone, Emily couldn't completely dispel that unease. On a cold, rainy night, after watching the horror movie, she blamed herself for choosing this genre to watch before going to bed. The movie was so haunting, full of creepy images and sudden noises that startled her. Emily quickly turned off the living room lights and returned to the bedroom, trying to quickly forget that creepy feeling. But as she lay down on the bed, turned off the lights, and pulled the covers over her, the strange feeling came over her again. A cold air seemed to be creeping up from under the bed to her feet. At first, she thought she was just haunted by the movie she had just watched. But as she closed her eyes and prepared to fall asleep, a soft sound rang out like a soft breath, but very clear. Her heart began to beat faster. Her mind became clear. She lay still, trying to listen more carefully. The breathing never stopped. It was steady and rhythmic, like the breathing of someone under her bed. Fear began to creep in, taking over Emily's entire body. She didn't dare move, afraid that if she moved, whatever was under the bed would realize she was awake. She had heard plenty of ghost stories from her friends, but she had never believed in the supernatural. But this moment was different. The breathing was too real. She wondered if someone was breaking into her apartment. Her heart pounding in her chest, Emily decided to face her fear. If there was someone under the bed, she had to do something. While mustering up all the courage to look under the bed, a soft voice suddenly rang out from below. "I've been here since you came in." Emily screamed in panic and rushed out of bed. Without bothering to put on her shoes or coat, she ran like crazy outside. She slammed the apartment door behind her. It was a drizzly night, and the streets were eerily quiet. Standing in the hallway, she gasped for breath and shivered. She couldn't believe what she just heard. Heart still pounding, Emily grabbed her phone from her coat pocket to call her best friend, only to realize that her phone's battery was dead. In her panic, she blamed herself for not charging it before going to bed. What should she do now? Her apartment was in an old apartment building, and at this hour, everyone was asleep. There was no one she could turn to for help. She couldn't stand out in the rain all night. After a moment of deliberation, Emily decided that she needed to go back to the apartment to get some things and charge her phone. She tried to convince herself that it was probably all just her imagination. After watching horror movies, she tiptoed open the door and stepped into the dark apartment. So quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat. Everything looked normal. The bed was still there, the windows were closed, there was no sign of any strangers. Emily walked softly towards the bed where she had heard breathing and voices. She stood a foot away from the bed, then took a deep breath, deciding to bend down and look under the bed. Darkness filled the air below, nothing but a dark void. No one there. A fleeting feeling of relief. She smiled to herself, mocking her irrational fear. She turned on the bedroom light and checked again. It was all empty. But as soon as she turned back, her eyes stopped at the mirror on the wall next to the bed. A line of black ink, scrawled across it, appeared as if it had just been written. "I will return when you are asleep." Emily couldn't believe her eyes. She took a few steps back, her whole body shaking. The cold, threatening words were clearly visible in the bedroom light. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, but it remained off. Unable to bear it another moment, Emily rushed out of the apartment once more, but this time not with fear, but with despair. She ran straight to her best friend Jen's house, not far away. Jen opened the door, looking sleepy and worried to see Emily standing there, pale and shaking. Emily told her story in a jumbled manner, her voice hoarse with fear. Jen didn't quite believe what Emily said, but seeing the panic in her friend's eyes, she decided to stay with Emily for the rest of the night. The next day, after regaining some composure, the two returned to the apartment. Jeanne believed that Emily had been haunted by the horror movie and that her imagination had created the terrifying story. But when they entered the bedroom, the words on the mirror were still there, as clear as if they had just been written. Jeanne stood there, stunned, her eyes filled with confusion. None of them could explain what had happened. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She decided to move out immediately. This apartment, small and cozy as it was, had become a living nightmare. She hired a moving company to pack her things, but before leaving, she stopped in front of the apartment door and looked back one last time. And in that moment, she saw a shadowy figure, vaguely, looming through the window, standing beside the bed. The shadow leaned down as if staring at her. Frightened, Emily quickly closed the door and left forever, leaving behind the apartment with its unsolved mysteries. In the end, Emily never returned to that apartment again. Although the story of the shadow under the bed became a distant memory, the haunting and fear followed her throughout her life. She never knew what was really under the bed that night, and she didn't want to know. But one thing was certain: no matter where she was, she would never look under the bed again. Emily has just moved to an old house in the suburbs, which is quiet and away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The house seemed perfect to her: cheap rent, safe area, and fresh air. The previous owner had left behind a few pieces of furniture, and one of them was a large antique mirror that was placed right in the bedroom. The mirror had an elaborately carved wooden frame, but over time, the paint had peeled off. Looking at it, Emily felt a little uneasy. But she just thought it was a unique antique and left the mirror in the corner of the room, telling herself she would explore it later. The first night, Emily quickly fell into a deep sleep after a long day of cleaning. But in the middle of the night, she suddenly woke up. A cold and ominous feeling filled the room, as if something was wrong. She looked around, and when her eyes stopped at the mirror, she noticed a strange light flashing from within it. Confused, Emily rubbed her eyes and looked closer. The light flashed again, this time clearer. She slowly approached the mirror, trying to figure out what was going on. The mirror had always reflected her room, but now the image in the mirror seemed different. Instead of reflecting the room exactly, it reflected a different space, a dark, cold room with gloomy black walls and no furniture. Emily panicked and stepped back. She took a deep breath, reassuring herself that this was just her hallucination. But the light flickered again, stronger than before, pulling her back to the image in the mirror. A dark figure loomed in the distance, slowly moving toward her in the reflection. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She turned her head to look behind her, but her room was still empty. Turning back to look at the mirror, the shadow became clearer, as if it was gradually stepping out of the darkness, approaching the edge of the mirror frame. Emily panicked. She quickly grabbed the cloth to cover the mirror, but her hands shook and the cloth fell to the floor. She bent down to pick it up, but when she looked up, the mirror had changed. The shadow in the mirror had now transformed into a human figure. It was a woman with a blurry face, but her eyes were red like fire, staring at Emily from the other side. Her gaze was blank, lifeless, yet haunting, as if peering into Emily's mind. The sudden knock on the door made Emily jump. She rushed out of the room and ran downstairs to find someone, but the house was completely silent. Her heart was pounding. She tried to breathe to calm down. When she returned to the room, the mirror was back to normal. No more strange lights or strange images. In the following days, Emily felt uneasy every time she entered her bedroom. She began to have strange dreams about the mirror. In her dream, she found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, but she couldn't move. Every time she tried to run, her feet were pinned to the ground. And then the woman with the red eyes appeared again, dragging Emily into the darkness. Another night, as she was trying to fall asleep, Emily heard soft laughter from the corner of her room. She opened her eyes, her whole body stiff. The sound was unclear, but it seemed to come from the mirror. The flashing light appeared again, stronger this time, as if the mirror wanted to attract her attention. She couldn't stand it anymore. Emily decided to cover the mirror forever. She quickly took a large piece of cloth and covered the entire mirror. But as soon as she covered it, a terrifying roar came from inside the mirror, causing the cloth to tear and fall to the floor. The mirror began to shake violently. The reflective surface began to swirl like a door to another world. Emily tried to run out of the room, but the door was locked. She pounded on the door, screaming. But no one heard. When she turned, she saw that the woman in the mirror had stepped out of the mirror room. Her hand was reaching out from the glass, her cold fingers clinging to the frame. Her face gradually became clearer, pale, horrible, with dry, cracked lips as if she had been dead for a long time. Emily screamed in panic. The woman pulled her entire body out of the mirror and hovered in front of Emily. The creepy laughter rang out again, not from behind her anymore, but right in her head. She felt a chill run down her spine as the woman's red eyes stared straight into hers. The room went dark, and Emily felt like she was being pulled into an endless space. She tried to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if the space was holding her back. The walls around her began to close in, the darkness growing thicker. In desperation, she turned around and saw the woman approaching. Her hand raised, her long, sharp fingers ready to touch her neck. Suddenly, there was a loud noise. Mike lives in an old apartment complex in downtown New York, where most of the apartments are run down, but for the affordable rent, he couldn't ask for more. The complex dates back to the 1950s and is known for its old, broken plumbing. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, a common room shared by 4 apartments on the same floor, and was generally avoided at night due to the cold, damp atmosphere. Mike wasn't superstitious, but he couldn't deny the strange feeling this bathroom gave him every time he entered it. Late one night, after working late, Mike was lying in bed getting ready for bed when he heard the sound of dripping water in the distance. At first, he thought it was just the familiar sound of an old plumbing system. But the sound of water continued and seemed to get louder. Feeling uneasy, Mike sat up and went outside to investigate. Mike's apartment wasn't very big, and the hallway leading to the bathroom wasn't long, but as he walked step by step in the dark, he somehow felt like the path seemed to lengthen, as if there was something strange. The light from the hallway flickered, sometimes only bright enough to see a few steps ahead. As he approached the bathroom, Mike realized that the sound of running water was no longer just a trickle, but had now become a continuous stream from the faucet. His unease grew, but he still tried to stay calm and opened the bathroom door. The dim yellow light from the ceiling illuminated a strange scene. The sink faucet was running, water splashing everywhere. Mike sighed, thinking someone had forgotten to turn it off, and went to turn it off. When he touched the handle, the water stopped immediately. Mike glanced around. Everything was normal, or at least he tried to convince himself that it was. He turned and walked out. However, just after leaving a few steps, the sound of water rang out again, this time louder than before. Mike stopped, his heart pounding. No way, he told himself, then turned back to look at the bathroom. The water started running again, not just from the sink, but from the toilet and the pipes in the ceiling as well. The water poured down onto the floor, seemingly without stopping, and the floor began to flood. Mike was afraid that the apartment would flood if he left it like that, so he quickly went to turn the faucet off again. But this time, when he touched the handle, the water didn't stop. Everything seemed surreal. Mike began to panic. He yanked on the faucet handle, trying to stop the flow, but it was no use. The water kept pouring out, flooding the floor, reaching his ankles. His anxiety began to turn to fear. Mike backed away, but as he was about to leave the room, the door slammed shut with such force that the entire room shook. The sound made him jump, his heart pounding. Mike panicked, trying to pull the door open, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like someone or something was holding the door shut from the outside. He started banging on the door, screaming, but no one answered.
Help me!
The water continued to rise, now up to his knees, cold and strangely thick. In his panic, Mike heard a chuckle coming from behind him. The laughter was soft, eerie, and seemed to echo from every corner of the room. He turned around, the flashlight on his phone shining through every corner of the small bathroom, but saw no one. Not a soul, no sign of life, just the sound of rushing water and creepy laughter, as if someone was standing right next to him, teasing him. Mike started to panic in earnest. He searched for any way out, but the water had risen dangerously high, waist-deep, and showed no signs of stopping. The room was freezing, and a suffocating feeling was enveloping him. With nothing left to lose, Mike shouted loudly, asking the invisible man to stop. But in response, he was only met with laughter that gradually faded away, leaving behind an eerie silence.
Help me!
He sensed something was wrong, something beyond imagination was happening. Mike turned and looked into the mirror, hoping to find some semblance of calm in himself. But instead of his own face, he saw a shadowy figure behind him. It was the image of a tall, thin man with deep black eyes, staring at him with a ghostly smile. The man stood silently in the middle of the water, seemingly unaffected by the flood. Panicked, Mike turned to face behind him, but there was no one. The room was empty, only the water rising little by little. But when he turned back to the mirror, the figure was still there, his eyes boring into Mike as if inviting him into another world, where life did not exist. Mike felt his blood freeze, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. He struggled with the door again, trying to pull it open, but the door still wouldn't budge. The laughter rang out again, closer this time, echoing from every corner of the room, driving Mike almost crazy. Then, suddenly, the water stopped. The room became strangely quiet. The door, which had been impossible to open, opened with a soft creak. Mike rushed out, soaked, his heart pounding. He looked back and realized that the water in the bathroom had disappeared without a trace. The room was dry and normal, as if nothing had happened. But Mike knew what he had just experienced was real. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't dare go back to that room. When telling the story to his neighbors, an elderly man said that many years ago, a man had drowned in this very bathroom, and since then, many people have heard the sound of running water at night, a sound that never stops. For Mike, this ghost story is not just a rumor. It is a terrifying reality that he will never forget. Julie, a single mother living with her young daughter Lily, decided to buy an old house in a small town in Pennsylvania. Hoping to start a new life after her divorce, Julie was delighted to find an affordable house. Although the house was old and in need of repair, it was located in a quiet area surrounded by lush green forest. It was the perfect start to a new life for the mother and daughter. As soon as she moved in, Julie noticed something strange about the house. The bathroom was located downstairs, near the living room, which always gave off a cold and gloomy feeling. At first, she thought it was just because the house was old and lacked natural light. But the heavy feeling in that small room never went away. Every time Julie passed the bathroom door, she always felt like someone was standing on the other side of the door, staring at her, even though there was no one else in the house except the two of them. That evening, after a long day of cleaning and organizing, Julie felt exhausted. She put her daughter to bed early and then went back to the living room to watch TV and relax a bit. As the clock approached midnight, Julie decided to go to bed. She got up to turn off the light, but just then, she heard a slight creaking sound coming from the bathroom. The old wooden door of the bathroom slowly opened, and there was no one inside. Julie shivered. She had made sure she had closed the door after using it last that afternoon. Trying to convince herself that it was just the wind blowing, she walked over to close the door and returned to her room. But after only a few steps, she heard the door slowly open again. This time, clearer, slower, as if someone was deliberately pushing it open from the inside. Julie spun around. She rushed to the door, slammed it shut firmly, and made sure there was no wind blowing through the house that could push the door open. Relieved, she went back to bed. However, not long after lying down, a noise woke Julie up. This time it was the sound of a wooden door slamming loudly. Julie jumped up, her heart pounding. The noise was coming from the bathroom. She turned on the nightlight and listened. The door was once again open, but this time it was no longer silent, but it made strange echoing sounds as if someone was pulling and pushing hard from inside. Julie was scared, but decided to check. She grabbed her flashlight and walked slowly down the stairs, her whole body shaking. When she got to the bathroom door, she saw that it was wide open, like a ghostly invitation. Julie turned on her flashlight and shined it into the bathroom, but saw no one. She went inside to check again. Inside was still a simple bathroom with a sink, toilet, and a small old mirror, all silent. But that strange feeling still did not go away. As she was about to leave the room, she heard a whisper from somewhere. "Don't open." The voice was faint, but clear. Julie froze. The whisper came again, closer, clearer, as if it were coming from the bathroom door she had just closed. She couldn't make sense of the sound. A cold feeling enveloped her, rendering her unable to move. Julie panicked, running towards the stairs to run back to her bedroom. But when she turned back, the door was slowly opening again, the creaking sound lingering in the darkness. She looked inside, and this time, in the dim light, she clearly saw a pale hand grasping the door from the inside, pulling it open. The water continued to rise, now up to his knees, cold and strangely thick. She raced up the stairs, feeling as if someone or something was following her. When she reached her bedroom and closed the door, she shivered in the corner, trying to steady her breathing and calm herself. She told herself it was just a hallucination caused by fatigue and stress. But deep down, Julie knew that something was wrong with this house. The next day, Julie decided to call a locksmith to check the bathroom door. The locksmith was a middle-aged man with a tough appearance who had been in the business for many years. After a thorough inspection, he said that there was nothing wrong with the door. But when Julie told him what happened last night, his eyes became serious. "This house has a rather dark history," the locksmith said, his voice low. "A family lived here many years ago. They had a son named David, and one day he suddenly disappeared. No one knows what happened, but ever since then, people have been hearing strange noises coming from the bathroom." Julie was silent, trying to absorb the locksmith's words. She didn't know how to react. Then he continued, "Many people who lived here have seen the bathroom door open by itself at night. Some have even heard whispering. Rumor has it that it was David's spirit trying to communicate from the other side." Julie felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't believe in ghost stories, But what had happened was too real to ignore. As soon as the locksmith left, Julie decided to talk to her neighbors to find out more. An old woman who lived nearby, listening to Julie's story, quietly shook her head. "My son used to play with David," she said. "He was a gentle boy, but one day he disappeared without a trace. People said he got stuck in that toilet. And since then, no one has dared to stay in this house for long." The old woman also said that many people had tried to sell the house before, but no one dared to buy it. Julie began to regret moving to this place. She could not live in a house haunted by the spirit of a missing child. That night, Julie decided to try something different. She got her daughter ready for bed and stood guard by the bathroom door herself. Every time the door tried to open, she gently closed it and said, "David, if you're here, I'm sorry for what happened to you. You don't have to be stuck here anymore. Go in peace." Samantha was a senior at a small suburban college. Final exams were coming up, and to escape the noise of her dormitory, she often went to the nearby public library to study. The library was housed in an old building from the 1930s. The atmosphere was quiet, the space spacious, but it had a gloomy, eerie air when night fell. The library was not without its spooky rumors. Some students reported hearing footsteps echoing down the deserted hallways, or unexplained whispers coming from the old bookshelves. Samantha, however, paid little attention to them. She did not believe in ghosts and dismissed them as the imaginations of the faint-hearted. Late one weekend evening, Samantha went to the library to finish her homework. Since it was a holiday, the library was almost empty, save for her and a few others studying in silence. The sense of peace seemed to pervade everything, making it easy for Samantha to concentrate. Around 11 p.m., feeling tired and in need of a break, Samantha decided to go to the bathroom. The library bathroom was in the basement, where few people went, and she had to go down a narrow, spiraling staircase. Each step she took echoed off the stone walls, the sound of loneliness becoming more pronounced. As she entered the bathroom, Samantha felt a cold, damp atmosphere, making her shiver slightly. The bathroom was old with 4 closed stalls, a sink, and a large mirror hanging right above the sink. Samantha stood in front of the mirror to wash her face, regaining her composure before continuing her studies. As she washed her hands and looked in the mirror, a strange feeling began to take over. She felt like someone was watching her, but when she turned around, the bathroom was completely empty. She tried to convince herself that it was just fatigue. The dim fluorescent light made everything seem colder, but it was nothing to worry about. Samantha wiped her face and turned to look in the mirror again. Suddenly, she saw a shadowy figure behind her. It wasn't clear, just a blurry shape with long hair that fell down to cover her face. Samantha's heart pounded, and she spun around, but there was nothing behind her. The bathroom was still empty. Her breathing became labored, but she tried to convince herself that it was just a tired illusion. She glanced back at the mirror, and the figure was gone. Samantha shook her head, laughing at herself for her irrational panic, then left the bathroom and returned to the study area. Still, she had a nagging feeling of unease. Every time she bent over to read for the rest of the evening, she felt as if something was wrong, as if someone was watching her from afar. She tried to ignore it and focus on her homework, but the nagging fear wouldn't go away. Near midnight, the library began to announce that it was closing time. Samantha packed up her books, but before she left, she felt the need to use the bathroom again. She didn't want to go back to the basement bathroom, but everything was deserted and she didn't want to go too far. As she walked down the stairs again, the chills came back. The bathroom seemed even darker than before. Samantha took a deep breath, trying to get her work done quickly and leave. She went straight into the bathroom and closed the door, but the feeling that something was wrong kept growing inside her. The slight whistling of the wind from the small window startled Samantha. As she stepped out of the room and stood before the sink, her attention was drawn to the mirror once more. The figure she had seen before was there again, clearer than ever, standing right behind her. But this time, it was not just a shadow. It was the image of a woman with long hair that covered her face. The woman was pale, exuding a chill that went to the bone. Samantha froze. She didn't dare turn around, just stood there staring at the mirror, her body stiff. The woman in the mirror began to approach her, slowly, her thin, pale hand reaching out as if to touch her shoulder. At this point, Samantha screamed and ran out of the bathroom. She ran up the stairs, her heart pounding, and never looked back. When she reached the library door, she felt like she had escaped the horror. But the image of the woman in the mirror haunted her every second. The next day, Samantha told the story to her friends and the library staff, but no one believed her. They thought she was too stressed out from her studies and had an overactive imagination. However, an older staff member who had worked at the library for many years looked at her strangely and pulled her aside. "You're not the first person to see her," she whispered. "Years ago, a girl committed suicide in that bathroom. Since then, several students have said they've seen her reflection in the mirror." Samantha's heart was pounding. She didn't want to believe it, but it was all too real. The clerk continued, "They say she never leaves the mirror. Every night, she stays there, waiting for someone to come in and see her." From that night on, Samantha never returned to the library late again, and she always stayed away from the mirror in the basement bathroom. But what she saw that night still haunted her mind, and sometimes, in her dreams, she still saw that woman, with cold hands reaching out from the mirror, as if to drag her into the darkness forever. The story of the mirror in the public restroom became a terrifying memory that Samantha could never forget. Whenever she entered an empty restroom, she always told herself that she would never look in the mirror for too long, because she didn't know if she would see something else lurking there. If you find the story interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for the next story.